You did what? Those words exploded through the phone so loud I had to pull it away from my ear. It wasn't just anger, it was panic. My daughter-in-law had lost her calm, carefully polished tone, and for a moment, I sat there frozen, the phone pressed against my palm, unsure what I had just stepped into. It had been a simple birthday gift. A bottle of champagne. Nothing extraordinary, nothing out of the ordinary. I thought little of it, and when her mother came over the next day, I passed it along, thinking it was a kind gesture to share. That's all. Just champagne. But when I told her what I'd done, the silence that followed on the other end of the line felt like the ground shifting beneath my feet. And then came that scream. You did what? Her reaction made no sense. Not then. But as I sat in my kitchen that afternoon, with the phone still hot in my hand, I realized I had stumbled into something I wasn't supposed to touch. Something that wasn't meant for me. To understand why a simple bottle of champagne could ignite such fury, I have to take you back. Back to the days when I believed family loyalty was unshakable. Back when I trusted my son's choices without question. Back when I thought love, marriage, and respect were enough to hold us together. I was wrong. This isn't just the story of a birthday gone wrong. This is about betrayal that cuts deep, secrets hidden in plain sight, and a silence I carried until it became my weapon. It's about how one gift, a gift meant to be harmless, unraveled everything I thought I knew about my own family. So stay with me, because what started with a champagne bottle ended with a revelation that changed every bond one held dear. And if you've ever trusted someone so completely, only to watch that trust shatter in ways you never saw coming, then you'll understand why this story still keeps me awake some nights. Before I take you back to where it all started, let me ask you, have you ever felt betrayed by someone you trusted like family? If yes, hit that like button, because your support reminds me I'm not alone in these struggles. And don't forget to subscribe. These stories are our way of healing together. When I think about my family, I don't see strangers in the shadows or enemies outside my door. I see faces I once loved without question. My son's face, first and foremost. I raised him to be thoughtful, to be kind, to respect others. He wasn't perfect. What child is? But he was mine, and for most of his life, I believed he loved me in return. When he first introduced me to his future wife, I tried to keep an open heart. She was polite, poised, the kind of woman who smiled easily in public, but measured every word she spoke in private. I noticed that early on, though I tried to ignore it. She was beautiful, yes, with that kind of confidence that draws people in. My son adored her, and that was enough for me, at least at the beginning. The early days were full of hopeful dinners and cautious conversations. She would compliment my cooking, but there was always a twist, always a small sting beneath the sugar. You make such hearty meals, she once said, smiling sweetly. Though I guess that's why everyone here is a little heavier than in my family. The table fell silent, then quickly filled with nervous laughter. I laughed too, brushing it off, but something inside me shifted. Over time, these comments became patterns, always framed as kindness, but never without a blade hidden in the middle. You raised your son well, though I had to teach him how to dress properly for work. Or it must be hard, letting go, since you've never worked outside the home. Small words, but they dug deep. And my son? He rarely noticed, or maybe he pretended not to notice. Love makes people blind, and he was so sure she was his perfect match. I wanted peace. I wanted to be the kind of mother-in-law who never interfered, who welcomed with open arms. So I stayed quiet, swallowing my hurt, convincing myself that maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe I was imagining the sharpness behind her words. But mothers know. We feel shifts in our families like storms in the air. There were children later. 2 little ones, bright-eyed and full of laughter. They became my anchor. With them I could forget the tension if only for a while. They would run into my arms, squealing with joy, and I would hold them tight, breathing in the simple love that children give freely. But even there I began to feel her influence. She corrected the way they spoke to me. She interrupted when they told me stories. She wanted to be the center and I was the grandmother. To her, that meant I was an accessory, someone to step around, not someone to respect. Birthdays were always my favorite time of year. In our family, we didn't need expensive gifts or elaborate parties, just togetherness. A homemade cake, a meal shared, laughter echoing through the kitchen. My son had grown up with that tradition, and I thought it would continue. But with her, everything became different. Birthdays were no longer about warmth. They became about appearances. She preferred restaurants where the food looked better than it tasted, places where she could take photos for social media. She smiled for the camera, holding a glass of wine, while I sat at the table wondering when my family had stopped seeing me. One year, She organized a dinner that cost more than I wanted anyone to spend. She gave me a gift card, tucked neatly into an envelope, and said with a smile, "I wasn't sure what you'd like, so this way you can pick for yourself." I thanked her, of course, but the truth? It felt like a transaction, not a gift. She didn't know me. She didn't want to. Still, I convinced myself it was fine. Families change. Traditions evolve. I could bend a little if it meant keeping the peace. But each time I bent, she pushed further. She filled the spaces between me and my son, whispering her opinions into his ear. I noticed it when he started visiting less often, when phone calls grew shorter, when holidays were suddenly too busy for them to attend. I told myself it was life, that he was building his own family, that this was normal. But deep down, I knew she was pulling strings. There were moments that made it clear. A look she gave me across the room when my son wasn't watching. A smirk when the children clung to me a little too long. A comment about how my house smelled old-fashioned, or how my way of speaking was outdated. She wanted me to feel small, to know my place. And yet I held on. Because of my son. Because of those children. Because I believed family was worth enduring discomfort for. So when my birthday came around again, I didn't expect much. A phone call, maybe a dinner, a card from the children. What I received instead was a knock on the door and a delivery. A single bottle of champagne. Expensive, no doubt. Beautifully wrapped. No note inside, just the gift. It was the kind of present that looked thoughtful from the outside but felt empty once unwrapped. Just a bottle. A label on glass. At the time I didn't think much of it. Champagne wasn't even my drink. I preferred coffee in the morning, tea in the afternoon, a small glass of wine with dinner if the day had been long. So when her mother stopped by the next day, chatting and catching up, I saw no harm in handing it over. "Take it," I said with a smile. "She sent it to me, but I think you'd enjoy it more." It was innocent. Harmless. Or so I believed. I had no idea that one small gesture, that one simple decision, would uncover everything she had worked so hard to keep hidden. I didn't know in that moment that I had accidentally pulled at the first thread of a very carefully woven fabric, and when the fabric began to unravel, there would be no stopping it. My birthday that year crept up quietly, the way it often does when you've lived long enough to know that the number doesn't matter as much as the faces gathered around you. I had always been the kind of woman who believed that a birthday wasn't about presents or grand displays, but about family filling a room with laughter, about voices overlapping in stories, about cake that wasn't perfect but was made with love. For years, even when times were hard, that tradition had been enough for me. So when that week rolled around, I found myself waiting with a strange mix of excitement and nerves. I thought perhaps this time would be different. Perhaps my son would remember the old ways, gather the children, walk through my door, and remind me that despite the cracks I felt growing between us, the bond still held strong. I baked a cake the night before, a simple one, vanilla with buttercream, just the way he used to love as a boy. I laid out plates, even set aside the good dishes I kept tucked away, as though preparing the table itself could somehow summon them all to me. But as the hours passed, my house remained quiet. The phone stayed silent. I lit a candle, then let it burn down without anyone to blow it out. I cut a slice of cake for myself, and tried to swallow around the lump in my throat. There was no knock at the door, no chorus of voices, not even a late-night visit. Nothing. It wasn't until the next afternoon that a delivery arrived. A man I didn't recognize stood at my porch with a neat box in his hands. He asked me to sign, smiled politely, and left before I could ask a single question. Inside was a bottle of champagne, beautifully packaged, expensive without a doubt. The glass glistened in the light, the label embossed in gold. It looked like something that belonged at a celebration far grander than mine. There was no card inside. No note in her handwriting. Just the bottle, sitting there like a substitute for her presence. I stared at it for a long while, unable to decide how I should feel. Was it thoughtful? A sign that she had remembered after all? Or was it dismissive, the kind of gift you send when you want to appear generous without actually being there? A bottle of champagne with no one to drink it with is a strange kind of gift. I don't drink it often, and even if I did, I had no one to share it with that night. The cake sat on the counter half-eaten, the frosting hardening at the edges. I tried to convince myself not to be ungrateful, not to dwell on what it meant, but my heart ached anyway. The next day her mother came by. She often stopped in for short visits. Her presence was lighter, easier, free of the tension that always seemed to hang in the air when her daughter was around. We sat in the kitchen sipping tea, catching up on small things, when I noticed her eyes flick toward the unopened box. I laughed softly and said, "Take it. She sent it for me, but you'd enjoy it more than I ever could." I placed the champagne in her hands without a second thought. To me, it was nothing more than a gesture passed along, a gift given forward. It wasn't until the following evening that my phone rang. Her name lit up the screen, and I answered with the casual warmth I always tried to keep in my voice. At first, she asked the usual questions. How was I feeling? Had I enjoyed my birthday? I hesitated before answering, admitting softly, it was quiet. She brushed past that, then her tone sharpened slightly as she asked, and the champagne? Did you like it? Without hesitation, I told her the truth. Oh, I gave it to your mother. She loves champagne, and I knew she'd appreciate it. There was silence, a long, heavy silence that stretched on until I almost thought the call had dropped. And then it came, her voice raw, loud, cracking with fury. You did what? The scream jolted me. I pulled the phone away, staring at it as though the device itself had betrayed me. I could hear her still, her breathing sharp, her words tumbling over themselves in a rush of disbelief. Tell me you didn't. Tell me you didn't give it to her. I sat frozen in my chair, stunned by her reaction. It wasn't annoyance. It wasn't disappointment. It was something deeper, something jagged, like I had just uncovered a secret I wasn't meant to touch. My heart thudded in my chest as I tried to make sense of her rage. It was just champagne. Just a bottle. Why would it matter? I tried to steady my voice to sound calm, to ask why it was such a problem, but she was no longer listening. She ended the call abruptly, leaving me alone in the silence of my kitchen, the echoes of her fury still ringing in my ears. I sat there for a long time, staring at the phone in my hand, the uneasiness in my chest growing heavier with each passing minute. I had no idea why that bottle mattered so much to her, but something told me I had just crossed a line that I didn't even know existed, and whatever waited beyond it, I was about to find out. I couldn't shake the sound of her voice, that scream, sharp and raw, echoing in my head long after the call ended. I sat there in my kitchen, staring at the quiet phone, wondering what I had done to provoke such fury. It was champagne. Just champagne. People gift bottles all the time. At weddings, anniversaries, holidays. It wasn't rare, it wasn't personal. It wasn't anything more than a gesture wrapped in glass. And yet, the way she reacted, it was as though I had tampered with something sacred, exposed something she needed to keep hidden. For days, I replayed the moment over and over, searching for an explanation. Why would a simple gift trigger such an eruption? The more I thought about it, the more uneasy I became, because once I began looking backward, the signs I had ignored started to align like pieces of a puzzle. There had been small things, little moments that felt odd at the time but were easy enough to dismiss. Conversations that ended abruptly when I walked into the room. Glances exchanged between her and her mother that seemed to carry words left unspoken. The way her voice would drop lower when she spoke on the phone, then rise to a practiced sweetness the moment I entered. Back then I told myself it was nothing. People are entitled to private conversations after all. But now, after that phone call, those fragments felt like warnings I had brushed aside. Money had become another wedge I couldn't ignore. My son, who once spoke freely with me about his plans, his bills, his dreams, had grown strangely defensive whenever finances came up. He'd shift in his chair, avoid eye contact, give short answers, and she was always there, her hand resting lightly on his arm, her smile stretched tight as if daring me to ask further. Once, when I mentioned setting aside something for the grandchildren's future, he cut me off sharply, insisting they didn't need my help. The words stung, not because I doubted his ability to provide, but because I knew they weren't his words at all. They were hers, whispered in his ear, shaping his responses until his voice no longer sounded like his own. Then there were the visits. Her mother's presence had grown more frequent, more deliberate. She wasn't unkind, but her timing always struck me as unusual, showing up unannounced, lingering too long, asking questions that felt less like curiosity and more like probing. At first, I thought she simply wanted connection, a bridge between our families. But now, as I looked back, I realized there was calculation in her steps. She had been circling, testing, watching, perhaps even preparing for something I could not yet see. The weight of it all pressed down on me. I began to notice how excluded I had become in my own family. Decisions were made without me. Celebrations planned where my presence felt like an afterthought. My son's laughter no longer came as easily in my kitchen. Instead, it rang louder in spaces I wasn't invited to. The grandchildren, once eager to tell me everything, began repeating phrases that sounded rehearsed, as though their words had been gently corrected before reaching me. It was as if an invisible wall had been built, brick by brick, until I was left standing on the outside, watching my own family through the cracks. I tried to convince myself I was imagining it, that I was being too sensitive, that age had made me fragile. But deep down I knew better. I had felt her hand slowly closing around the people I loved most, steering them, shaping them, pulling them further from me with every passing day. And then came that scream. That unguarded, unfiltered reaction to something as trivial as champagne. It was the first time her mask slipped, the first time I heard what she sounded like when the performance fell away. And in that instant I understood, there was more to that gift than I realized. Something hidden, something dangerous. I didn't have all the answers yet, but I knew one thing with certainty. Whatever she was protecting, I had stumbled into it. And the way she reacted told me I was never meant to. Stories like mine are painful to share, but I know many of you have felt this kind of heartbreak too. Please comment below if you've ever been made to feel like an outsider in your own family. And while you're here, share this video. Someone out there might need to hear it tonight. I didn't sleep well after that call. Her words echoed in my ears long into the night, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face twisted in fury even though I hadn't been there to witness it. My instincts told me something wasn't right. And when instincts have carried you through motherhood, widowhood, and the quiet loneliness of old age, you learn to listen. I began to pay closer attention. Every visit, every phone call, every silence. I started keeping a mental ledger of the things I noticed. It wasn't paranoia, it was survival. And slowly the pieces began to align. It started with the champagne bottle itself. Most gifts are ordinary. A simple bottle from the store, maybe wrapped, maybe not. But this one had weight to it. I remembered holding it in my hands when I unwrapped it. How heavy it felt, how carefully she had chosen it. It wasn't just any champagne. It was a rare vintage, imported, the kind that collectors buy to keep in climate-controlled cellars. At the time I thought perhaps it was her way of showing class, or maybe trying to impress. But after her reaction I looked closer. I found the receipt tucked in the gift bag. Normally I wouldn't pry, but something inside urged me to. The receipt wasn't from the local store. It was from a private supplier in another state, a place that didn't sell to the public unless you had an account that required registration. It was then I realized this wasn't a casual purchase. It was intentional. I began asking quiet questions, discreetly, carefully. A phone call to an old friend who used to work in import and export, a casual inquiry with someone at the club who knew about fine wines. What I discovered left me breathless. The bottle wasn't just rare, it was traceable. Registered as part of a collection under my name. My name, which meant legally it was tied to me. That's when the truth began to unravel. My late husband and I had invested in a few rare wines years ago, something he enjoyed collecting. After his passing, I never paid much attention to them. They were stored away, gathering dust, forgotten in the shadows of grief. But someone hadn't forgotten. Someone had found out, and somehow that bottle had made its way into her hands. Why would she gift me something that belonged to me in the first place? Unless it wasn't a gift at all. Unless it was part of a paper trail, something meant to shift ownership, blur lines, create confusion. Inheritance. That word hung in my mind like a storm cloud. I could feel my chest tightening as realization struck. This wasn't about champagne. This was about legacy, about control, about stripping away the last pieces of what my husband had left me. The more I dug, the more the ground beneath me seemed to shift. Quietly, I found papers in my son's office when I stopped by to bring the grandchildren cookies. I wasn't snooping. I simply followed my instincts when I noticed a folder left on his desk half open. Inside I saw documents, letters, drafts of agreements. Her mother's name appeared more than once. And at the bottom of one page, in handwriting I knew too well, was my son's signature. It hit me then. They were trying to move assets, my assets, through technicalities, through clever manipulations. And the champagne? It was the key, a symbolic gesture. Maybe even evidence in some twisted plan to prove I had willingly given something away. My birthday gift wasn't a gift at all. It was a weapon. The pain that washed over me was unlike anything I'd felt before. Betrayal doesn't always come as a scream in the night. Sometimes it comes as a whisper, a carefully chosen gesture, a smile hiding a dagger. I confronted my son, gently at first. I asked about the champagne, about the papers, about the visits from her mother. His face hardened in a way I had never seen. He told me I was overthinking. He told me I was paranoid. And then, when I pressed further, he defended her. Not just defended. He attacked me, accusing me of trying to drive a wedge between them. His words cut deeper than any blade. My own son, the boy I had raised through scraped knees and broken hearts, the man I had held when his father died, stood before me now as a stranger. A stranger who looked at me as though I were the enemy. I didn't argue. I couldn't. My throat tightened with unshed tears, and my hands trembled as I folded them in my lap to keep from reaching for him. In that moment, I understood that she had him completely. Whatever spell she had cast, whatever web she had spun, he was caught in it. I left his house that day with a hollow ache in my chest, knowing the battle wasn't just about money or inheritance. It was about something far greater. My place in the family I had built, the love I thought unbreakable, the bond between mother and son that I had believed could survive anything. And yet, as I stepped out into the cool evening air, I also knew something else. I wasn't finished. They might have underestimated me, but I had lived too long, endured too much, to let my story end this way. Their plan was clever, yes, but they had made one mistake. They had forgotten who I was. And I intended to remind them. The evening after my confrontation with my son, I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the quiet shadows stretching across the walls. My hands were folded, steady now, though my heart felt anything but. I replayed his words over and over, each syllable chipping away at the foundation of what I thought we were. He had chosen her side, not with hesitation but with certainty. And in that certainty I saw the truth. I had already been replaced. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply observed. Sometimes silence holds more weight than any outburst ever could. A few days later I received an envelope in the mail. No return address, just my name neatly written across the front. Inside was a document, unsigned but clear. A draft of an agreement transferring certain assets from my estate into a trust controlled by my daughter-in-law's mother. My name was mentioned, but in a way that suggested my consent had already been given. And the reference to the champagne? It was right there, in black and white, used as proof that I had willingly parted with part of the collection. I sat frozen, the paper trembling in my hands. My birthday gift was never meant to celebrate me. It was meant to undo me. The realization struck like a knife. This wasn't just her idea. This was her family's design, their fingerprints all over it, with her as the messenger. I began to piece it together. Small conversations I'd overheard at dinners, the quick glances exchanged when finances were mentioned, the way her mother always smiled too sweetly in my direction. They weren't coincidences. They were rehearsals, careful steps in a larger play. And my son? He was the linchpin. Whether knowingly or reluctantly, he had become their shield. He had allowed their whispers to grow into plans, their plans into actions. My son, my own flesh and blood, had chosen silence when he should have chosen me. That silence cut deeper than betrayal itself. I grieved quietly in those days. Not for the money, not for the champagne, but for the boy I had raised. The one who once promised, through tears, that he would always take care of me. I mourned the loss of his loyalty, the shift of his gaze toward another woman's family while mine crumbled in the background. But grief is a strange companion. It sharpens you, hardens you, teaches you patience. And as I folded that document back into its envelope, I knew one thing with chilling clarity. I would not confront them again. I would not beg. I would not scream. That was what they expected. No, I would watch. I would wait. And when the time came, I would make sure that every step they had taken against me would lead them straight into their own undoing. Silent revenge has a flavor far richer than rage. It lingers longer, strikes deeper, and leaves no room for denial. If you're still here listening to my story, it means you care. And honestly, that means more than you know. Please subscribe and turn on the bell. Don't just watch and disappear. Your support keeps these real stories alive. That night, I poured myself a cup of tea and placed the envelope beside me. My heart still ached, but beneath that ache was a fire beginning to burn. They thought they had outsmarted me, that age had dulled my instincts, that grief had weakened my resolve. They were wrong. I was not the helpless widow they imagined. I was still his wife's memory keeper, my family's foundation, and a woman who had survived storms they could not even name. They had played their hand too early, too arrogantly. And I was just getting started. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the window watching the streetlights flicker like restless eyes, my mind turning over every detail. They believed I was broken, defeated, too naive to see what was happening. They mistook my silence for weakness. What they didn't understand was that silence was my sharpest weapon. The next morning I made my first quiet move. I called an old acquaintance, one of my husband's trusted colleagues who had transitioned into financial law years ago. He answered with warmth in his voice, and though I didn't reveal everything right away, I told him enough. I described the draft document, the champagne, the subtle maneuvering. He didn't laugh it off, nor did he dismiss it as paranoia. Instead, he told me something chilling. These kinds of manipulations are more common than you think. And they always start small, like with a gift. I asked him to recommend someone discreet. Within days, I was sitting across from a lawyer in a quiet office on the other side of town, my hand steady, my expression calm. I brought every paper, every document, even the smallest receipts I had saved. The lawyer listened carefully, his pen scratching across his pad as he pieced together the picture. When I handed him the draft I had found, he paused, leaned back, and said, "They were preparing to use this as precedent. But now that we know, we can turn the game in your favor." For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself a small smile. We began restructuring everything. My will, my assets, my accounts, each one carefully locked, shielded, and redirected. I left nothing untouched. I shifted property titles, set up new trusts in names only I controlled, and ensured that anything of real value was secured beyond their reach. I did it quietly, without spectacle, without warning. And every time I signed a paper, I felt the weight of their betrayal lift slightly from my chest. At home, I played my part. I smiled when she handed me tea, even though I could see the calculation in her eyes. I listened as she told stories about her friends, feigning interest though I knew each detail was designed to place herself above me. I nodded when my son spoke of future plans, though every word reminded me of how far he had drifted. I learned to mirror their performance. When she boasted about handling finances so efficiently, I praised her organization. When he insisted they would take care of me in the years to come, I thanked him with a softness that masked my bitterness. They thought I was slipping further into their grasp, when in truth, I was slipping away from their control altogether. At night, when the house was still, I wrote letters. Not to them, but to myself, reminders of who I was before their schemes. A wife who had stood beside a husband through storms. A mother who had sacrificed so her son could stand tall. I refused to let their betrayal erase those truths. Each word I wrote became part of my armor. Boundaries began to form, quietly but firmly. When she asked to help with my accounts, I declined sweetly, telling her I had it handled. When my son pressed about moving closer into their home, I smiled and said I was comfortable where I was. No arguments, no raised voices, just an unshakable line they could not cross. I could see her frustration building. She hid it behind her painted smile, but I noticed the way her jaw tightened, the way her voice faltered when she realized I was no longer as malleable as before. And him? My son? He mistook my composure for acceptance. He believed I had forgiven, that I had surrendered to their version of family. But beneath my calm exterior, a storm was gathering. Each move I made was deliberate. Each choice, a brick laid in the quiet fortress of my revenge. They didn't know it yet, but their own arrogance had given me the time and the clarity I needed. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to expose them prematurely. No. My revenge would be patient, methodical, devastating in its precision. By the time they realized what I had done, it would already be too late. And so I smiled at their dinners, laughed softly at their jokes, and thanked them for their empty gestures. All the while, my heart carried the weight of their betrayal like a secret dagger, hidden but sharp, waiting for the perfect moment to be drawn. They thought they were the players. What they didn't know was that I had already rewritten the game. The day of their victory came, or so they thought. I had watched them for months, weaving their web tighter, convinced that they were clever enough to pull it all together without me noticing. But I had noticed everything. I had prepared everything. And I was ready. It began with a gathering. My daughter-in-law's mother had come over, her perfume arriving a second before she did, her presence thick with smugness. They had papers with them, neatly stacked, prepared, signed by hands that were not mine. They expected me to be a formality, a final checkmark in a scheme they believed was flawless. My son sat with them, quiet but complicit. His eyes darted between me and his wife, torn but unwilling to break free of her grasp. When they slid the folder across the table toward me, I didn't flinch. The mother-in-law smiled, her lips tight, her words honeyed as she said, "This will secure your legacy. We only want what's best for the family." I opened the folder slowly. I let the silence stretch long enough for their confidence to swell, and then with deliberate calm, I pushed the papers back toward them. "I appreciate the effort you've put into this," I said softly, "but I've already taken care of everything." Confusion flickered across her face, then irritation. My daughter-in-law leaned forward, her voice sharper than before. "What do you mean you've taken care of everything?" I reached into my bag and pulled out a smaller envelope, its seal still crisp. I laid it gently on the table. "My affairs have been restructured," I said. "My assets are secured, my will is locked, and my lawyer has strict instructions. Nothing, absolutely nothing, falls into hands that would misuse it." The color drained from her cheeks. She hadn't expected this. Her mother shifted uncomfortably, trying to recover the ground, but I didn't give her the chance. "You see," I continued, still calm, still steady. "I realized too late that trust can be misplaced. But not too late to act. Everything you thought you were building has already crumbled beneath you. And you didn't even hear it fall. My son's face. Oh, I'll never forget it. The realization struck him like a wave. His loyalty to his wife had blinded him. And now the truth unraveled before his very eyes. He tried to speak, to defend, but the words collapsed on his tongue. The weight of his choice was finally clear. He had traded his mother's trust for his wife's schemes, and in the end, he had gained nothing. My daughter-in-law's voice cracked as she tried to cover the panic trembling at the edges. You can't do this. You can't just cut us out like that. I looked at her, my expression serene, my tone colder than they had ever heard from me. I didn't cut you out, I said. You did that all on your own. You mistook kindness for weakness, and silence for ignorance. That was your mistake, not mine. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. They sat there, stunned, the papers in front of them now nothing more than wasted ink. My son buried his face in his hands, the weight of regret pressing down, too late to undo what had been done. His wife stared at me, her eyes wide, searching for cracks in my composure, but there were none left to find. And then with a calm finality, I delivered the line I had rehearsed in my heart for months. You thought you were writing the end of my story, but I was only writing the beginning of yours. I rose from the table, collected my bag and walked away, not with anger, not with tears, but with the quiet dignity of someone who had survived the storm and turned it into her strength. They had nothing left to say. Their power had dissolved in the silence I left behind. And that, perhaps, was the sweetest revenge of all. Did you feel that satisfaction when the truth finally came out? Don't keep it to yourself. Share this video so others can feel that same sense of justice. And please, like this video if you believe karma always finds a way. Betrayal. It cuts the deepest when it comes from the people you once trusted the most. Not from strangers, not from enemies, but from the ones you carried in your heart. The ones you sacrificed for. The ones you believed would stand beside you when the world grew cold. That's what makes it so painful. It's not the act itself, but the faces behind it. For a long time, I thought that betrayal had broken me. I thought my silence made me weak, that my patience was nothing more than submission. But I was wrong. Silence is not weakness. It is power waiting for the right moment. Patience is not surrender. It is strategy disguised as stillness. And wisdom. Wisdom is knowing that storms don't have to be fought with thunder. Sometimes, they can be dismantled quietly, piece by piece, until those who built them are left standing in ruins of their own making. Looking back, I realized that my revenge wasn't in shouting or cursing, or trying to humiliate them the way they once tried to humiliate me. My revenge was in living with dignity, in protecting what mattered most, and in proving that their schemes had no power over me. They thought they could write me out of my own life, but I chose to hold the pen. Now my family is fractured, perhaps forever. My son, blinded by love and loyalty to the wrong person, has lost the very foundation he thought he could manipulate. My daughter-in-law and her mother, so certain of their victory, are left with nothing but their bitterness. And me? I walk away lighter, freer, no longer carrying the burden of pretense. There's a strange peace in that. Because sometimes revenge doesn't need words. It doesn't need raised voices or dramatic confrontations. Sometimes it only needs timing. The quiet, devastating precision of choosing the moment when truth reveals itself, and everything falls into place. And as I step forward into my own future, I carry this truth with me. Strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it waits. And when it finally moves, it changes everything. I open my heart to you today. The least you can do for me is hit that subscribe button and like this video. It's free for you, but it means the world to me. And if you know someone struggling with family betrayal, send this to them. It might give them hope.